Hello everyone. So I just spent like 2 hours lying in bed in the dark, really hoping that I could get some sleep. It was not happening tonight, so now I'm awake. And in other news, I'm still not in labor yet. But my husband sent me this article today and I got really excited about it. The first thing I found myself asking was, okay, how are Americans going to react to this? And my first thought was this really hopeful, idealistic, okay, well, if we see the NHS doing this, maybe we're going to mirror it. Because we've seen a bunch of other countries banning puberty blockers. Maybe we're going to see the American healthcare system kind of take that hint and be like, okay, it's time to stop using puberty blockers on small children. And if you're of the opinion that there's nothing wrong with using puberty blockers on small children, we can talk about that. Actually, we'll talk about that in this video. And if you're still of the opinion that there's nothing wrong about using puberty blockers on small children, please leave a comment. I have been trying really, really hard for a really long time to get a good, solid, pro-puberty blocker argument from somebody. Like, I keep having people who will message me and they'll be like, yeah, puberty blockers are actually really excellent for kids and it's a wonderful opportunity for them to have like this really wonderful life. And every single time I get those messages, I'm like, great, this is wonderful. Because I've heard the anti-puberty blocker side of the argument. I haven't heard the pro-puberty blocker side of the argument, so I really want to hear that. I want to talk to somebody, I want to ask them questions, and I want to get feedback so that I understand why people would think this is a good idea, honestly. Because I don't understand at this point. I don't understand, and I know that I don't understand. And so I get excited, I ask them about it, and I'm like, okay, I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but given this list of negative side effects, all of which are pretty alarming, what are the circumstances that make puberty blockers a good idea? Because, I mean, if you look at a list of side effects like this and you think to yourself, oh my god, that's horrible, like that's terrifying, which is kind of what I think when I look at that list of side effects, maybe it is justified. You don't know the answer to a question until you ask the question. So that's my rule. I try to play by that rule. I don't know. If it were something like terminal cancer and they had a miracle drug that would keep my kid alive, except these are the side effects, that would be horrifying. But it's like, are you sure it's going to cure the cancer? And they'll be like, oh yeah, they'll cure the cancer. It's like, well, I mean, their life is going to be altered, but at least they'll be alive and at least they'll have the opportunity to do things with their life. And that could be really wonderful and really special, and that'd be really good for them as opposed to dying of terminal cancer. So there are circumstances where a really, really horrible list of side effects is maybe not as horrible as the alternative. I want to know if the transgender situation in children is one of those sets of circumstances. So again, I want to talk to people. I want to hear their perspective. This is the bad stuff. All this bad stuff. What is this saving you from on the other side? And every time I ask people, they stop talking to me immediately. Just sudden radio silence. They never get back to me. The moment I ask a question, they shut down and I never hear from them again. Which is very frustrating for me because I'm asking questions because I want to know the answers. I'm not asking questions because I'm trying to win an argument. I don't care. And that might be really weird to people these days because everyone's really super politicized and, very, very polarized politically. But for me, I just want to know the answer to the question. I don't really care who wins. That doesn't necessarily mean anything to me because I would hope that the people who are correct would win. And so my goal has been to determine what is actually correct and true. And then I'll root for those guys, whoever they are. But I haven't determined that yet, so I have to ask the question, right? People don't get that. People have to put me in a box. It's like, you're either left wing or you're right wing. You got to be one of the two because everybody's one of the two. So which one are you? And then we can figure out whether we like you or we don't like you. I'm a centrist. You don't like me. It's that simple. You don't have to ask. Yeah, they never get back to me, which is really unfortunate. So there is the argument that I've seen put forth. Would you rather have a live trans daughter or a dead son? Would you rather have a live trans son or a dead daughter? That argument. Clinicians actually use that on parents, which I think is just horribly manipulative and coercive. And seriously, who makes good decisions under duress? Like, what makes you think that this is a good way to sell an idea? But they do this. And I'm not done reading through the WPATH files. I'm not done. I'm still working my way through it. And I've been trying to screenshot and post that. And I'm going to be doing that as like a series of shorts as I get through the WPATH files. The thing that always made me doubt the suicide argument, honestly, wasn't even the fact that some people are saying the science supports it and other people are saying the science doesn't support it. Because remember, each side has their own set of science. So depending on who you're talking to, the science says this or the science says that. And it gets very difficult. They also have their own language. Depending on who you're talking to, they have their own language too. So if you're making YouTube video like this, you have to be kind of semi-conscious all the time of the language that you're using, because one side's going to interpret it one way and the other side's going to interpret it the other way. And it's like, I don't think the polarized folks could have devised a system that would be more divisive if they had tried. And I don't know if they're trying or not to be divisive. The thing that really poked holes in that argument of, well, transition or suicide, honestly, the thing that did it for me was my own situation, my own circumstances. You know, I had these weird tendencies, these weird feelings, these weird little pieces of me, like little bits of broken glass that would just come poking out of the woodwork every once in a while, right? For decades at this point. And I was always really mystified by them. It's like, I have no idea what's going on here in this little area of my life, but it's something, I'll probably never know what it is. I'm probably just weird. And then I finally ran into the concept of autoandrophilia, and after I got over my initial disgust and revulsion at the concept of autoandrophilia, like, oh my god, am I a pervert? Once I actually started looking at it, and I wanna thank Phil Lilly for his work in this, because that's what really finally made it like palatable enough for me to actually look at it without cringing. Once I started looking at it and realizing, okay, this is what's going on with me, you know, there were people who messaged me and said, yeah, you're going to need to transition. You need to transition, because otherwise those feelings are just going to get more and more and more intense until you either transition or you want to kill yourself. And, you know, I don't know how many months it's been, but nothing has changed. It hasn't intensified at all. And honestly, I think taking the time to kind of put those feelings in context and kind of understand where they're coming from and why I might be having them in the first place, for me at least, that really kind of helped me to integrate them into my own self so that they weren't as jagged little bits of broken glass throughout my life. And that was really nice, actually. I do not in any way anticipate ever coming to a place in my life where I feel like I need to transition. Do I wish things were a little different sometimes? Yeah. Oh, yes, I do. But they're not. And I try to be realistic about my circumstances, and I'd rather live the fullest life that I can with what I have to work with than try and alter it. And there's a multitude of reasons for that, but that's just a personal preference for me. And that's where the, oh, it's transition or suicide argument starts to kind of get a little crumbled at the edges. It's like, okay, people are saying this is a must, but in my case, it's really not. And then there's the question that people ask sometimes. It's like, okay, well, if everyone keeps saying if we don't transition all these kids, they're going to commit suicide, where were the suicide numbers before we started saying that these kids would commit suicide? Like, they're not there. There wasn't some pre-existing wave after wave after wave of youth suicide that suddenly got dampened when we decided, oh, let's just transition kids. That didn't happen. So I have some doubts, and I think they're reasonable doubts, about this notion that if we don't transition children, they'll commit suicide. And I think, at the very least, the people at the NHS seem to have similar doubts, because they're no longer giving puberty blockers to minors, which I think is really important, outside of clinical trials, of course, but I think that's really important because we have this big, scary list of negative side effects, and to date, in my own case at least, no one has explained to me what it is that justifies all of this. No one has explained that to me yet. I'm not saying there isn't an explanation. If you have an explanation, by all means, put a comment in, message me in some way or another. Like, let me know. Help me to understand. But as of right now, no one has explained this to me in a way that is even remotely satisfactory. In fact, most people, when I ask for an explanation, I never hear from them again. And so for a lot of my own research, it's not necessarily as oriented toward child transition. I'm much more interested in understanding trans psychology in a more all-encompassing sense. I'm not as interested in the ROGD kids. I'm not as interested in trans youth or any of that stuff. It's just, I'm old, okay? I'm way too old to care about that. At one point I started looking at my kids and it's like, okay, they are entering into that age demographic where this is going to start to become an issue. And it's like, okay, I'm aware of it. I'm aware of the arguments on both sides, insofar as I've been able to obtain information about those arguments. And I feel pretty confident that if this does become an issue, I feel comfortable talking to my kids about it. Like, okay, what makes you think that this is a good idea? I think there are a lot of parents who end up getting taken off guard when this sort of thing happens with their kids, where the kid comes home from school and says, Mom, Dad, this is how I feel. And those parents just don't really know what to make of it. I've seen many stories like that. And I've also seen a lot of people, usually right-wingers, who are kind of aggressive. They think that any time a kid starts identifying as trans, it's because the parents were just bad parents. Or they think it's because it's some sort of Munch Housen situation. And for the really, really tiny kids, yeah, Munch Housen is definitely a problem. But for, preteens, for like kids who are just in their earliest stages of puberty, or, just prepubescent, just barely, sometimes it's social. Sometimes the parents just did not see this coming. They don't know anything about it. They don't have any know-how. And I feel really bad for those parents because, this comes at them out of the blue. how are they supposed to prepare for something that they can't anticipate? And so then they start scrambling for information as quickly as they can, and they run into this narrative: dead child or trans child. You have an option for one or the other. And I think there's a lot of there's a lot of doubt that can be cast on that argument. And I think it's important to explore other less permanent options, and also just the level of misinformation, the idea that these options that people are putting forth are somehow not permanent. Oh, puberty blockers aren't permanent. They're totally 100% reversible. Where are you getting this information? Do you realize you're running around with severely outdated information? But again, like, one side has their set of science, the other side has their set of science. Good luck getting the two to see eye to eye, because it's not going to happen. And so, I mean, I think that's kind of why I'm making this video. I feel really bad for American families that are looking what's happening in Britain and feeling afraid. Because some of these families have talked about, I feel afraid. I don't think you do need to be afraid. I think that if we cease the use and the access to puberty blockers, and at least for minors, cross-sex hormones, that's actually going to be a good thing. I'm very doubtful, and I mean, I'm not a clinician, but it's just the same. Just from listening to clinicians talking, just looking at things like the WPATH Files, as an individual, as a parent, I am extremely doubtful of the benefits of some of these drugs when it comes to minors. I wouldn't give my kids this stuff. I would not. Absolutely not. And that's because I've been reading up on them for a good long while, and I just look at it as like, this would be not the first, the second, or even the third thing I would consider giving to my kids. There are so many other options out there, and nobody ever talks about them. And we need to have conversations about what are some alternative options? Like, what can we do when someone who's young and growing up and figuring themselves out comes to their parents and says, hey, I think I'm transgender. Hey, I think I'm a boy. Hey, I think I'm a girl. There's like a bunch of different things that you can do that do not involve the use of very permanent medications or surgical procedures, which are also very permanent, and that is happening with children in our country right now. And I got into a conversation with somebody, I can't even remember. They shut down on me too. Like, I messaged them at some point about something. I can't remember which of the things I was messaging them about really set them off, but they just went blank, never talked to me again. And what had happened was they started off by telling me that I didn't understand the science, because everybody tells me I don't understand the science. It's always the other team's science. And then they told me that I, wasn't using logic, and I must have been poorly educated by the American educational system, because I guess they're not American. And, they're telling me all this, and they give me pages and pages and pages and pages of comments that I had to read through really quickly. And I replied with a series of examples to, kind of put forward my case, like, this is what I think is going on. Here's, you said this isn't happening. Here's an example of it happening. Here's another example of it happening. Here's another example of it happening. Here's another example with court records to show that it did happen, because this person's argument was that you can't trust anything you see in the news, which I thought was interesting. It's like, well, if there's a news article about a court case that happened, then it's pretty easy to verify whether the news article is telling you the truth or not, right? Because there's a court case. So there's going to be a paper trail, right? So, okay. Anyway, at some point they just stopped talking to me, and it was either because of the number of recorded rapes committed by trans women on female inmates in prisons, because that was one of the subjects that got brought up, or it was the surgeries and life-altering procedures being done on children in the United States, which they couldn't see being realistic, and it is. The children being taken away from their parents, which they also couldn't see as being a realistic thing. It's like that has to be sensationalized. Not sure it is. But anyway, they very abruptly stopped talking to me, so that was kind of the end of that conversation, which was a little frustrating because I had invested hours into gathering that information and trying to make sure that I was not talking out of my ass. If you are a family member of a child who identifies as trans and you are terrified for your child because you're afraid that, you know, if these laws make their way across the ocean and suddenly you find them in the United States, you might be thinking that that's going to hurt your kid, and that would be a terrifying thought. But I'm not sure it's going to be as bad as people are making it out to be. Like, people are acting like this is the end of the world. Like, oh, we're killing trans kids. Are we? Are we really? Is that really what's happening? Because, I mean, they're saying that's what's happening. They're telling us that's what's happening. I'm not at all convinced that that is what is actually happening here. Now, again, I don't know if I've said it yet in this video. When it comes to changing pronouns or changing names or stuff like that, I've heard arguments for and against. I don't know enough to say that I know anything. And so I'm not going to make any kind of judgment there because I don't feel confident making a judgment call yet. But when it comes to puberty blockers, I feel moderately confident in saying that's not a good thing for your kid. There's other things that would be better. And I mean, you look at situations like Jazz Jennings, a lot of people have brought her up and everybody's like, and again, this is the tricky thing about discussing these subjects, because number one, people shut off. If you say the wrong thing, they shut off, they don't listen to another word you say. And they break off communication, and you can't have that flow of information back and forth. You can't have that dialogue. And it's extremely frustrating. But the other thing is, a lot of people will look at information that you provide them like this is a thing that happened, and I think that it's relevant to this particular conversation. They'll be like, well, that's the other side's information. That's the other side's science. Their science doesn't count. My science is the good science. What do you do with that? So, I mean, I can look at the situation that happened with Jazz Jennings where she went to have bottom surgery and she hadn't grown enough tissue to have a successful bottom surgery with, because she hadn't been through puberty. And, you know, I can say, I'm not sure that these puberty blockers, like, I understand that people are like, oh, well, it would be just so horrible if you identify as male to have a period. I'm about to give birth in a couple weeks. I've accepted this. I'm okay with this. This is human biology. This is just the reality. I understand that I'm not a severe case. I'm not particularly gender dysphoric, so I really don't count, and that's fair. But if you don't have the tissue to work with, you can't have a successful bottom surgery. If you don't go through puberty, you can't have a successful bottom surgery. If you don't go through puberty, you can't have an orgasm. That's a piece of your life that you're never going to experience. It's gone. I would not want to take away these pieces of life experience from my children, unless, of course, it was something like terminal cancer where it's like, yep, they're for sure gonna die, and it's gonna be not fun. So, you know, the impression that I keep finding myself left with when I research puberty blockers is that they just don't do what people want them to do. They sound nice. Oh, just stop your puberty. Take a break. Get yourself some time to think. it sounds so nice, and it doesn't work out the way people say it's going to work out. And so I think if the medical community just says, hey, this was a horrible idea, and takes it away, I think that would be for the best. I honestly do. And I know that's scary to a lot of people. And I'm having Braxton Hicks contractions right now. They're kind of uncomfortable, and I'm still not in labor. But anyway, I think I'm going to call that it for this video right now, and I'm going to go get like a cold pack or something and try to make myself feel just a little bit more comfortable. Yeah, I'm actually really happy about this, and I know that there are going to be people who are going to try and frame this as just the worst development in the world, unless I'm really, really missing something. And I have tried very hard to hear the other side of the story. Unless I'm really missing something, this is a good thing. Like, I'm not trying to... I know that it probably seems like I'm on team anti-trans right now, because that's how everybody's kind of divided it in their minds. There's like team pro-trans and team anti-trans, and some people are saying team left and team right. I don't care. Neither one of them is my team, so I don't really care. But I understand that if I say anything that's a little too far against the trans rhetoric of the day, I'm going to be kicked over into team anti-trans. And I'm already on team trans in the eyes of the right, so they already hates my guts, and they don't listen to a thing I say anyway. But, I mean, I'm trying not to alienate people, because I think that we need to discuss these ideas back and forth, because there's a lot of information that can be gathered by just listening to the other side, and nobody wants to do that. But to the best of my ability, that's what I have been trying to do, and I think that this particular issue is one where trans people themselves, you know, whether you want to include me in that number or not, trans people themselves will be best served by the removal of puberty blockers as an option for youth medical care. I need to get a cold pack. I hope you guys are all doing well, and I'll talk to y'all later.